Silas Whitmore froze mid-stride, the post he'd been hauling slipping from his shoulder and thudding against the dirt. The scream that pierced the morning wasn't the kind that came from a startled animal. No, it was human, sharp, panicked, full of fear that clawed at the soul. He snatched his rifle from where it leaned against a barn and took off toward the sound, boots pounding the dry earth. The cry had come from the eastern edge of his land, near the old oak where the boundary line curved toward the creek. He'd worked this ranch for nearly a decade, and nothing good ever screamed at dawn. As he reached the rise near the bend, the scene stopped him cold. There, tied to a fence post, was a girl no older than 16. Her dress hung in shreds, smeared with dirt and blood, her dark hair tangled and crusted. But it was her eyes that struck him hardest. Wild, afraid, but still fierce, like an animal that hadn't yet given up the fight. She stared at him with sharp suspicion. It wasn't panic. It was calculation, like she was measuring whether he was danger or salvation. He lowered the barrel of his rifle slowly, showing open hands as he stepped closer. "I'm not here to hurt you," he said, drawing the knife from his belt. "I'm going to cut you free." She didn't speak again until he was sawing at the ropes. "Are you with them?" Silas paused, glanced at her. "No, ma'am. Just me out here." The rope snapped, revealing angry red welts on her wrists. She stumbled, but he caught her before she could collapse completely. That's when he noticed the fine quality of her torn dress. Nothing a ranch girl would wear, and her hands, soft despite the cuts. She wasn't used to work. Something was off. Then he saw the necklace. A thin gold chain, barely visible beneath the blood-stained collar, and on it, a locket he'd seen before, hanging in a portrait over his fireplace. A cold knot formed in his gut. Before he could ask anything, her lips parted. "You don't recognize me, do you?" Silas barely had time to respond before hoofbeats echoed across the pasture. Fast, getting closer. He didn't think. He pulled at her feet and half-dragged her behind a massive oak. She helped more than he expected, despite her state. From behind the tree, they watched as 3 riders crested the ridge. They moved with a slow menace, scanning the ground like bloodhounds. The one in the center wore a wide-brimmed black hat. The others flanked him, guns low on their hips, hands resting just a breath away from the grips. These weren't cowhands or travelers. They were predators. The girl pressed herself to bark, her voice low but hard-edged. "They're Garrett's men. They're the ones who tied me up." Silas studied them through the branches. The man in the black hat dismounted, knelt by the post, and touched the rope like he was reading it. "Why would they take you?" Silas whispered. She turned toward him with something fierce in her eyes. "You really don't know who I am, do you?" Before he could answer, one of the riders shouted that the ropes had been cut. The man in black stood and called out, his voice slicing through the field. "Silas Whitmore, I know you're out there. You've got something that belongs to Mr. Garrett. He wants it back." Silas stiffened. He didn't know anyone named Garrett, but his gut said these weren't men you argued with. The girl grabbed his arm, her grip stronger than he expected. "Please, don't let them take me. You don't know what's at stake." Then she said something that turned his world upside down. "This land, it was my father's. Harrison Caldwell. They killed him for it." Silas's breath caught. That name, etched into the old headstone behind his house, belonged to the man who'd once owned this land. A man said to have died without family, leaving the property to be sold off cheap. But now this girl, bloody and desperate, was saying she was his daughter. It couldn't be. And yet, the locket, the eyes, the voice, she looked just like the man in the portrait above his mantel. The riders were moving again, spreading out, forming a net. Time was slipping. "Why haven't you come back before?" Silas asked. "I didn't know," she said, her voice breaking. "He sent me to my aunt in San Francisco when things got bad. Men were threatening him. He thought I'd be safer there. I only found out he was dead a few months ago, when my aunt told me the truth before she passed." Silas's mind reeled. He thought back to the sale, how the lawyer had sweated through his collar and rushed the paperwork, how certain documents were missing and blamed on a fire. "You came back to claim the land," he said. She nodded. "I hired a lawyer, but Garrett's men caught me." Said if I didn't back off, I'd disappear too. A branch cracked to their left. One of the riders was nearly on top of them. Silas felt the weight of a choice pressing down on his chest. He could stay silent, hand her over, and keep the life he'd built, or he could do the right thing and lose everything. He looked at her again, this fierce, half-broken girl standing on the edge of ruin, and suddenly the picture in the frame above his fire wasn't just decoration. It was history, blood, truth, and it was knocking on his door. The moment his boots hit the rock, Silas knew there was no turning back. The girl's hand in his, cold but steady, gripped like she had already made peace with the danger they were charging into. "Can you run?" he'd asked, barely a whisper. She just nodded, and that was enough. They bolted from behind a massive oak, tearing through the brittle underbrush. Shouts exploded behind them, the sound of urgency and fury, followed by the unmistakable crack of hooves pounding after them. The three men had seen them. There was no more hiding. Gunfire snapped across the pasture, a shot striking the rocks just beside Silas's head. Stone shards stung his cheek, but he didn't stop. Neither did she. The girl, Evangeline, moved with a fierce precision, weaving between the trees like she'd been running for years. Silas led them to a narrow break between two stone formations he'd stumbled on once during a dry season. It was tight but passable, and it brought them out to a steep ravine. 15 feet down, a swollen creek thundered past, the recent rains turning into a frothing ribbon of icy water. Evangeline didn't hesitate. "How well do you swim?" she asked, her voice barely audible over the roar. Before Silas could reply, she was already climbing down the jagged wall, fingers finding grips where none seemed to exist. He followed, every step chipping away at the life he thought he'd been living for the past 8 years. The current hit him like a wall, cold, wild, unforgiving. But they made it across, dragged themselves onto the opposite bank, soaked and gasping for air. From behind, muffled curses told them the men hadn't given up, but the rocks and river had slowed their pursuit. "They won't quit," she muttered, squeezing water from her dark hair. "Not until they've got what they came for." Silas sat in the mud, catching his breath, looking at this girl who had cracked open a truth he hadn't known was buried in his land. Her name had weight now. Evangeline Caldwell, the last living claim to everything he thought was his. "Tell me about him," Silas asked. "This man, Garrett. Why does he want this land so badly?" Her expression turned to iron. "Because it gives him control. Over the water, over the ranchers, over everything. My father refused to sell, so Garrett made sure he died. And me? He made sure I vanished before I could stand in his way." The sound of wooden wheels clattering over stone broke the silence. A wagon appeared from behind the trees. Not more gunmen, but an old woman at the reins. Her long silver hair was tied back, her blue dress faded by time and weather. Evangeline stood at once, waving. "Mrs. Henley." The woman's eyes widened, and her expression changed from relief to stern resolve. She drove the mules down toward the creek. "Evangeline Caldwell," she called out, her voice strong and laced with reprimand. "Do you have any idea what storm you've kicked up coming back here?" Silas stood, unsure what was unfolding. "Who is she?" he asked. "She was my father's housekeeper," Evangeline replied, helping the woman down from the wagon. "She's the one who wrote to me. The reason I came back." The older woman studied Silas with eyes sharp enough to cut. "So you're the man who's been living in Harrison Caldwell's house all these years. I wonder when truth would come knocking." "You knew?" Silas asked. "All this time you knew she was alive?" "Of course I knew," Martha snapped. "I watched that girl grow up. But there's a difference between knowing and having the power to do something about it." From the wagon, she retrieved a thick satchel and handed it to Evangeline with trembling hands. "Time to end this." Evangeline opened it. Inside lay a heavy document, sealed with red wax. Her hands shook as she unfolded it. "Harrison's will," Martha said. "The real one. Garrett tried to burn it. This proves the ranch is hers. The land, the buildings, the cattle, every damn acre." Tears filled Evangeline's eyes, her hands gripping the document like it could anchor her to something real. But Martha wasn't done. There's more. Your father left you something else. Names, records, evidence of every crooked deal Garrett ever made. Enough to bury him. A low rumble echoed across the valley. Hooves again. They were coming. Martha climbed back onto wagon. Get in. We got to reach Millbrook. The bank has a rest. If we can get there before Garrett realizes what we've got, we can end this. Silas helped Evangeline onto the bench seat, climbing up beside them. He scanned the horizon and froze. On a ridge above them, a dark figure sat astride a black horse. A spyglass raised his eye. Martha spotted him too. That's him, she whispered. That's Marcus Garrett. With surprising strength, she lashed the reins. The mules surged forward, the wagon jostling across the uneven terrain. Behind them, Garrett's riders closed in. They know about the will, Martha shouted. Someone talked. Who? Silas demanded. Only 3 people knew. Martha yelled over the noise. Me, the banker, and the lawyer. Silas felt a chill. Crawford, the one who sold me the ranch. That's him, she spat. A snake. When Evangeline hired him, he ran straight to Garrett. A bullet whistled past, splintering the wagon's rear panel. Another slammed into a wheel spoke, snapping it but not stopping them. Evangeline turned, steadying herself against the swaying wagon. She drew a pistol from the satchel and aimed it behind them. Then, with fire in her voice, she screamed, "You murdered my father, Garrett, but I'm not afraid of you." The wagon jolted over a rise, and Garrett's hand lifted, signaling his men to hold fire. In that eerie moment of silence, his voice rose like smoke. "Give me the will, girl. You can ride away free." Evangeline's answer was simple. She cocked the pistol, and the look in her eyes told Silas she wouldn't stop until the truth was written in fire and ash. Silas never saw the gun until it was aimed his way. "The only thing I've got of yours," Martha said with a tight grin, "is a bullet with your name carved on it." Her voice was all grit and fire. "That's Harrison's girl for sure," she added, proud. Always more stubborn than wise. But Silas wasn't focused on her bravado. His eyes were locked on the rising stone around them. The chase had led them in a wide arc, and now they were closing on a canyon with steep walls and only one way out. "Garrett's not chasing them," he said, urgency threading his voice. "He's corralling us, herding us into a trap." Martha's face paled as she followed his gaze. "Damn it," she muttered, her curses colorful enough to make a cavalryman flinch. They entered the canyon slowly, wagon wheels crunching against gravel. On the cliffs above, Garrett's men appeared, rifles aimed downward. The canyon was a bowl, and they were in the center. No cover, no escape. Garrett came into view, riding in from the mouth of the canyon, his black hat shadowing a face hard as stone. He didn't shout. His voice, calm and collected, was somehow more terrifying. "Miss Caldwell," he called out, "you're young, maybe too young to understand how the real world works. Those documents you're carrying, your father's will, are fakes. Smart forgeries, but forgeries all the same." Evangeline didn't flinch. She held the pistol steady in both hands. "They're real, and you know it, just like you know you killed my father to steal his land." Garrett's smile was thin and icy. "Your father died of a heart attack. That's what the doctor said." "A doctor you paid." Martha snapped. He didn't deny it. "Perhaps. But who'll challenge him now? You? A senile old widow spinning ghost stories? Or Mr. Whitmore here, living for nearly a decade on land he never rightfully owned?" The trap Garrett set wasn't just one of geography. It was legal, emotional, moral. Everyone around Evangeline was either gone, bought, or tangled up in the lies, except her. A 15-year-old girl with a piece of paper and more backbone than a lot of them. Silas felt something shift in him as he looked around. Rifles aimed at them. Garrett's smug confidence. And the girl, standing tall despite the odds. He stepped forward, placing himself between her and Garrett's horse. "You're right about one thing," he said, voice steady. "I didn't know this land wasn't mine when I bought it, but now I do, and that changes everything." Garrett raised a brow. You're a reasonable man, Whitmore. Walk away now, and I'll let you keep the ranch. Even throw in the northern pastures water rights. All you got to do is forget this girl ever showed up. The offer shimmered like gold in the sun. It would be so easy. But Silas didn't move. No, he said simply. The word echoed through the canyon like a gunshot. Garrett's pleasant mask slipped. His men shifted uneasily above. You disappoint me, he muttered. That's when Martha Henley stood, pulling herself upright in the wagon. In one hand, a stick of dynamite. In the other, a lit match. Garrett, she said, voice dry and cold. Civilized men don't murder children. The horses bucked nervously. My husband taught me to use this during the Apache raids. One toss and this canyon floor will be buried under a landslide. The standoff froze. Garrett's men couldn't risk a shot, and Martha was crazy enough, or brave enough, to do it. You're bluffing, Garrett growled. Her chuckle was sand and sorrow. I'm 73. I've buried 2 husbands, 3 children, and more friends than I can count. Dying doesn't scare me. Letting you win does. Evangeline opened the will then, and her voice rang out across the canyon. Harrison Caldwell, of sound mind and body, hereby leave all my possessions to my daughter, Evangeline Marie Caldwell. Each word chipped away at Garrett's story. The truth rang louder than bullets. But Garrett wasn't done. He pulled out a folded paper. Touching, he sneered. But I have something better. A confession, signed by your father. Says he forged that will. Says the land belongs to me. Evangeline froze. Even Silas could see the signature look convincing. Too convincing. Garrett waved the document. You want this to disappear? Lay down your weapons. For a moment, Silas feared she'd cave. But then she smiled. You made a mistake, she said quietly. My father was left-handed. Always signed with his left. Your forgery slants to the right. The color drained from Garrett's face. You never knew him. That's why you couldn't fake him. Just then, the thunder of hooves echoed off the canyon walls. But it wasn't more of Garrett's men. Through the entrance rode Sheriff Torres, 6 deputies, and a man in a dark suit, clearly a federal marshal. Martha lowered the dynamite, triumphant. Told the sheriff yesterday to give us till noon, she said. Now Garrett's men were the ones surrounded, caught between a lawman's justice and an old woman's stick of dynamite. The sheriff approached. Marcus Garrett, he announced, badge glinting. You're under arrest for murder, fraud, and kidnapping. The marshal followed, inspecting the documents. We've been building a case against you for 2 years. Thanks to Miss Caldwell, we got what we need. Garrett reached for his gun, but Silas moved faster. Years of frontier life made him quick, and his fist connected before the outlaw could draw. Garrett crumpled to the ground. As the dust settled, Evangeline turned to Silas. I suppose you'll need a new place to live, she said softly. Silas nodded. I reckon I do. 8 years is a long time, but it was never really mine. She looked up at him with those burning, Caldwell eyes. The ranch is too much for me to run alone. I could use a partner. Someone who knows the land. Honest. Strong. He looked at her, stunned. What are you saying? 50-50. You teach me the ranch. I handle the legal mess. Deal. He took her hand and shook it firmly. Deal. 3 months later, the Caldwell, Whitmore Ranch was thriving. Evangeline was a quick study and had taken the leadership like she was born for it. Silas brought the hard-won wisdom of the land, and together they made it work. Garrett was locked away for 25 years, and his empire dismantled piece by piece. In the end, justice wasn't served by bullets or revenge. It was served by decency, by choosing to do what was right, even when it cost everything. Now, the next story waits. It might not explain anything, but you'll feel it, and when it's done, something in you will be different.